Imagine this. A beautiful suburban house, fresh paint, a manicured lawn. Inside, the appliances are new, the floors are polished. A husband, healthy and successful, has just left for the office. The children, bright and well-fed, are at school. And a woman stands in the silence of her living room. She has everything her culture told her to want. A college education, traded for an early marriage. A career ambition, surrendered for the sacred title of housewife. She is the envy of every woman who hasn't yet achieved this dream. And yet, as she stands there, she is overwhelmed by a feeling of such profound non-existence that she has no language for it. It is not sadness. It is not a medical condition her doctor can name. It is a strange, vacant despair that creeps in between the waxing of the floor and the chauffeuring of the children. It is a hunger with no source, a grief with no corpse. This is the landscape Betty Friedan walks into in 1963. But she doesn't just describe this housewife's sorrow. She identifies it as a collective ghost haunting the most prosperous nation on earth. She gives it a name, the problem that has no name. The central paradox of Friedan's masterwork, the feminine mystique, is one so insidious that it masquerades as a solution. For a century, the fight had been for freedom, for the vote, for education, for entry into the professional world. Women had won those battles. They had breached the walls. And then, in a strange, quiet counter-revolution following World War II, they were convinced to retreat. They were told that the apex of human existence was not to be found in the chaos of the marketplace or the life of the mind, but in the soft, warm prison of domesticity. The mystique was the ultimate bait and switch. It sold women on the idea that their highest purpose, their only true feminine fulfillment, lay in total surrender to the roles of wife, mother, and consumer. The paradox is this. After fighting for the right to choose, women were now being told that the only choice was to go home. The problem, then, wasn't oppression by force. It was suffocation by velvet rope. It was the agony of a gilded cage, the door of which you had been persuaded to lock from the inside. Have you ever felt that your life looks perfect on paper, but feels hollow in practice? Have you ever chased a goal you were supposed to want, only to find that the achievement felt like a door slamming shut instead of opening? Friedan's book is an archaeological dig into that feeling. She is not just writing about women in the 1950s. She is dissecting the anatomy of a cultural trance. She asks the question that no one dared to voice. What happens when an entire gender is convinced to amputate half of its own humanity? Its ambition, its intellect, its drive for independent purpose, in the name of love and security? The answer she uncovers is a wasteland of tranquilizers, extramarital affairs, and children who become the unwilling recipients of their mother's buried, raging ambition. This book is not a historical artifact. It is a key. It unlocks the mystery of why so many of us, men and women alike, feel a quiet desperation behind the facade of success. It explains why the pursuit of comfort can often lead to a slow death of the spirit. We are about to walk through the looking glass. We are going to dissect the social architecture that built that suburban prison. And more importantly, we are going to follow Friedan as she finds the blueprints for the escape. But first, we have to sit with that woman in the living room. We have to feel the weight of her emptiness. Because until you can name the problem, you will remain its prisoner. The journey to the core of that mystique begins now. If this hidden architecture of your own mind fascinates you, hit subscribe now. We dissect the books that dissect the culture every single week. In the quiet desperation of that suburban living room, Friedan refuses to accept the easy answers. The magazines, the experts, the smiling faces on television, they all had a diagnosis for her malaise. They called it a failure to adjust. They called it a loss of femininity. They called it a need for a new washing machine. But Friedan, a trained psychologist who had sacrificed her own career to the mystique before clawing her way back, saw something else entirely. She saw a problem of identity so deeply buried that its victims couldn't even form the question, The problem wasn't that women were unfeminine. The problem was that they had been stripped of the self to be feminine with. The hidden disease Friedan diagnoses is what she calls the feminine mystique itself, a closed loop of cultural propaganda that redefined femininity as passivity, dependence, and living through others. It was a masterpiece of social engineering. After the war, the factories that had employed Rosie the Riveter needed to close. The men returning from battle needed jobs. And so a massive, coordinated campaign was launched, not through legislation, but through the soft power of magazines, advertising, and Freudian psychology twisted into pop culture dogma. The message was relentless. A real woman doesn't want a career. A real woman doesn't want to paint or write or think. A real woman wants to be adored, to serve, to find her identity in her husband's paycheck and her children's report cards. This is where Friedan makes her most devastating link. She connects this cultural prison to the work of Abraham Maslow, the psychologist who gave us the hierarchy of needs. Maslow argued that once our basic needs for food, safety, and love are met, we are driven by a higher need, self-actualization. The need to become what we are capable of becoming. The need for a purpose that is truly our own. The feminine mystique, Friedan realized, was a system designed to keep women trapped at the lower levels of that hierarchy. It promised them love, security, and comfort, and then slammed the door on the next step. Women were being fed a feast of safety while starving to death for meaning. Can you feel the shape of this trap in your own life? The way modern culture still sells you the same seductive lie, just in different packaging? The mystique promised that fulfillment comes from outside yourself, from the right relationship, the right possessions, the right image. It taught women to see themselves not as protagonists, but as supporting characters in someone else's story. And this, Friedan argues, is the root of that nameless despair. It is the self buried alive. It is the ambition that has no outlet, turning inward and becoming depression. It is the intellect with no object becoming self-loathing. The women she interviewed weren't crazy. They weren't maladjusted. They were drowning in a surplus of meaninglessness. They had solved the problem of survival, only to discover the harder problem of purpose. And no one, not their husbands, not their doctors, not the experts on the radio, would admit the problem existed. They were gaslit by an entire civilization. The diagnosis is brutal. The problem with no name is the agony of a self that has been forbidden to exist. The consequences of this buried self are not merely psychological, they are architectural. They shape the very structure of reality. Friedan takes us inside the homes of these women, and what she finds is a landscape of quiet catastrophe. The bright kitchens become stages for performative emptiness. The suburban developments, designed as utopias for family life, transform into isolated holding cells. The women she interviews describe a strange, floating sensation, as if they are watching their own lives from a great distance. They are present at their own funerals. This is the first consequence, the death of time. Without a project of their own, without work that matters to them, women find that the days blur into an endless, repetitive loop. Monday is Tuesday is Sunday. The children grow, the husband advances, and the housewife stands still, frozen in a role that was supposed to be her final destination. Friedan calls it the comfortable concentration camp, a phrase that shocks us precisely because it names the violence of comfort without freedom. These women are not starving. They are not beaten. They are simply erased, slowly, one load of laundry at a time. But the erasure does not stop with the woman herself. It radiates outward. The children become the recipients of their mother's buried ambition. A son is pushed to achieve what she cannot. A daughter is groomed to repeat the same cycle, learning early that her value lies in her attractiveness and her ability to please. The husband, returning home from a world of purpose and action, finds a wife desperate for vicarious life through his stories, her need so intense it becomes suffocating. He retreats further into work. She feels more abandoned. The marriage, built on the promise of eternal romance, calcifies into a transaction of resentment and dependency. The problem with no name does not stay in the living room. It infects the entire ecosystem of human connection. And then there is the most haunting consequence of all, the sexual fallout. Friedan documents how the Mystique, in its effort to glorify femininity, actually destroys authentic intimacy. When a woman is forbidden to be a full person, she can only ever be a symbol of motherhood, of purity, of domestic perfection. The husband does not make love to a woman. He makes love to an idea. And the woman, disconnected from her own body's desires because her mind has been put to sleep, performs desirability as another chore. The affair, when it comes, is not about passion. It is about the desperate attempt to feel real, if only for an hour. The problem with no name, Friedan reveals, is the great unspoken killer of love. Do you see the pattern now? A society that tells half its population that their highest purpose is to disappear into the lives of others does not just harm those individuals. It creates a world of inauthentic relationships, of mothers who cannot model wholeness, of fathers who cannot connect, of children raised in the emotional fallout of their parents' unfulfilled lives. The stakes could not be higher. The Mystique promised to save the family. Instead, it hollowed it out from the inside. The architecture of the problem is complete. The only question left is whether the walls can be breached. If you want to understand the invisible forces shaping your life, smash that like button and drop a comment. What's a problem with no name you felt but couldn't articulate? The walls can be breached, but the exit is not where the culture told women to look. It is not in a better orgasm, a more attentive husband, or a labor-saving device that finally makes housework effortless. These were the solutions sold to women by the very magazines that diagnosed their malaise as a personal failure. Friedan rejects all of it. The path out, she argues, is not more comfort. It is more discomfort. It is the willingness to trade the gilded cage for the terrifying responsibility of freedom. The prescription she offers is deceptively simple, yet psychologically radical. She calls it the active role. This is not about going back to work for a paycheck. It is not about proving something to men. It is about the existential necessity of committing to a life purpose that has nothing to do with the roles of wife and mother. Friedan draws on the humanistic psychology of thinkers like Maslow and Rollo May to argue that human beings require a project. We require something that pulls us forward, that demands our growth, that forces us to confront our own limits and expand them. Without this, we atrophy. The feminine mystique convinced women that this drive was masculine, that to want a project was to be unwomanly. Friedan's counter-argument is fierce. This drive is human. To amputate it is to amputate the self. The solution, then, is not a job. It is a commitment. It is the decision to take seriously one's own intellectual and creative life. Friedan tells the stories of women who made this leap. Women who went back to school in their 30s and 40s, who started writing, who entered professions not for the money, but for the meaning. She describes the terror of the first step, the guilt, the fear of judgment, the voice inside that whispers you are abandoning your children. And then she describes the transformation. The depression lifts. The marriage, which was suffocating under the weight of the wife's dependency, breathes again. The children, far from being harmed, gain a mother who is actually present because she is actually alive. The paradox is that by becoming more selfish in the highest sense, by claiming her own becoming, the woman becomes more capable of genuine love. This is the counterintuitive secret Friedan guards until this moment. The Mystique taught that sacrifice was the path to love. Give up yourself, it said, and you will be adored. Friedan turns this on its head. You cannot give what you do not have. A self that has been erased cannot love. It can only cling, resent, and devour. The active role is the reclaiming of self-possession. It is the decision that your life belongs to you, not to the projections of a culture that profits from your smallness. The prescription is not easy. It requires swimming against a current that still pulls hard. It requires enduring the accusation of selfishness from those who benefited from your selflessness. But Friedan offers no other medicine. The problem with no name, she insists, has only one cure: a name of your own, carved out through work that matters, through a life that is yours. The key is in your hand. The door is in front of you. What remains is the courage to turn it. The courage to turn the key does not merely open a door for one woman. It collapses an entire architecture of illusion. Friedan's final revelation is that the feminine mystique was never really about women at all. It was about a society that had lost its way, that had mistaken comfort for purpose and consumption for meaning. The problem with no name, she realizes in the book's deepest moment, was not a woman's problem. It was a human problem, amplified and concentrated in the lives of those forbidden to name it. This is the ultimate truth Friedan leaves us with. The mystique distorted everyone. It trapped men in the role of breadwinner, cut off from their children and their own emotional lives. It trapped children in the crossfire of their parents' unfulfilled existences. It trapped the culture in a cycle of consumption disguised as progress. The housewife staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if this is all there is, was not the problem. She was a symptom of a civilization that had forgotten that human beings need to create, to struggle, to become. The mystique promised an end to striving. It delivered an end to aliveness. Friedan's final pages are not a triumph anthem. They are a quiet, urgent call to something harder than rebellion: integration. She argues that the solution is not for women to become men, not to abandon family for career, not to reverse the hierarchy of oppression. The solution is to refuse the either or entirely. It is to insist that a woman can be both soft and ambitious, both nurturing and driven, both a mother and a maker. The feminine mystique forced a choice: be a woman or be a person. Friedan's genius is to reveal this as a false dilemma, a trick of a culture that could not handle the full humanity of half its members. What does it mean to live in the aftermath of this revelation? It means recognizing that the problem with no name has not disappeared. It has shapeshifted. Today, it whispers that fulfillment lies in the perfect Instagram life, in the side hustle that will set you free, in the relationship that will complete you. It still sells the same lie, that your wholeness comes from outside yourself. Friedan's book remains a mirror, and in it, we see our own faces. The suburban housewife of 1963 is now the corporate executive burning out, the influencer performing happiness, the mother torn between the impossible standards of work and family. The names change. The mystique adapts. But the question remains: are you living your life, or the life you are told to want? As we close this journey through Friedan's masterpiece, the challenge she leaves is not intellectual. It is existential. She asks you to sit with yourself in the silence and ask the question the mystique forbids: what do I truly want? Not what I should want, not what would please others, not what looks good on paper. What do I, the irreducible self buried beneath expectation, actually desire? The answer to that question is the beginning of everything. The problem finally has a name. And now, so do you.